Rose Ayala, come here.
The effects of solitary confinement can be detrimental to a person's mental health, and most of the time it only makes violent people more violent. It should always be used as a last resort, especially for juvenile offenders. Mental health is a subject I feel strongly about, and I feel compelled to protect people from avoidable mental deterioration, even prisoners. When a baby is born, you can't just feed, burp, and change the baby. You have to love the baby and talk to the baby. A lack of human contact can actually kill a newborn. Even if the baby doesn't die, there is a very increased chance the child will grow up to suffer from a number of different mental illnesses. The same goes for prisoners. Whether you agree or not, they are people too, and regular socialization is vital for any person to flourish. Solitary confinement for long periods of time creates more problems than it will ever solve, and can even raise the offender's chances of being incarcerated again. Today I will share with you why I believe we should ban long-term solitary confinement, the effects it has on the brain, what steps can potentially be taken first or instead of solitary, and what life is like for a person after solitary confinement. While I do understand that it can't be completely ruled out because some inmates are far too dangerous to themselves or others, I will explain my stance on why it should at least be the last step to take in punishing an inmate, and hopefully never be a long-term solution. So what is solitary confinement? Typically, solitary confinement is being locked in a very small cell for 22 to 24 hours a day with a large steel door, no windows, severely limited contact with other people, silence, plain white walls, restricted personal items and reading material, non-contact family visits, and the list goes on. Inmates may be allowed to get out for 1 hour a day, sometimes not at all. The definition can vary prison to prison. Sounds maddening, doesn't it? Well, it is. It's a form of cruel and inhumane punishment. I know people that have worked in segregation, and I've heard many stories of inmates flooding their cells, starting fires, throwing their own feces and urine at the guards, or putting it on themselves. The worst of all is when they begin to mutilate themselves, purposely inflicting physical pain. Now that you have an understanding of what solitary confinement is, we can go on to its devastating effects on the mind. The effects of solitary confinement can have on the brain are very alarming and serious. The most definite and obvious effect being social anxiety disorder. This makes it difficult to socialize with people in everyday human interactions. Fearing negative evaluation from others, those suffering from social anxiety disorder may drink and or use drugs to reduce their fears of social interactions. This is just setting offenders up for failure upon their release, considering the vast majority of them are in prison for drugs in the first place. A couple of other physical effects include, but are not limited to, chronic headaches, severe weight loss, depression, insomnia, dizziness, and heart palpitations. University of Wisconsin psychologist Harry Harlow conducted a study in 1959 where he took 6 monkeys and put them in total isolation for 3, 6, 12, and 24 months. According to his study, they come out of isolation very psychologically disturbed, but when they were put back into a group with normal monkeys, they made very limited recovery in social interactions. The longer the isolation, the worse the results were for the monkeys. As you can imagine, similar effects take place when a human is isolated for long periods of time. They may never recover from the emotional trauma isolation imposes, so it's especially important we don't subdue juvenile offenders to solitary confinement for long periods of time. There's actually been a slight decrease in isolation throughout the United States as people are noticing all the negative effects it can have on a person. However, we still have a ways to go and more ways to improve the system in place. If inmates had more access to sunlight, more face-to-face contact, sensory input rather than just cell walls and bars, I think mental health would drastically improve. Prisoners should be moved from isolation units to mental health units to aid them in being successful upon their release, or when they're put back into population. Today there are still more than 80,000 men, women, and children under solitary confinement in the U.S. Prison officials should be more equipped to deal with the more violent offenders and should keep close count of who goes in, why they go in, and for how long. Sometimes inmates are released from long periods of isolation into the free world, and once they are out, have little to no access to mental health help in their recovery process. Stuart Gratian, a board-certified psychologist and a former faculty member of Harvard Medical School, has interviewed hundreds of prisoners in solitary confinement, and they found that approximately 1/3 of prisoners in isolation were deemed actively psychotic and or suicidal. Another thing, they're usually cut off from other things that inmates are given access to, such as GED classes and job training, so they often get out much worse off than when they came in. We should be setting these inmates up for success instead of failure. Life after solitary confinement is no easy transition, and I only hope one day I can make a difference in the system, no matter how small. Today we went over what solitary confinement is, the effects it has on the brain and well-being, and a few steps that can be taken to improve their situations. Human contact is absolutely necessary for everyone, even the worst people. No one should ever have to feel that level of loneliness. Hopefully the use of solitary confinement will continue to decrease, the resources available to those in solitary will increase, and prison guards will have the knowledge, equipment, and compassion to deal with these troubled offenders. Thank you.